The kicker is that you don't need an AI that predicts or just surfaces all the things that are happening. You need AI that allows you to narrow the decision space and allow you to focus on just the important things. I'm Derek Aranda, and this is Supply ChAInge. Here, we go beyond AI hype to examine how to stand up intelligent supply chains in complex organizations. If you want a clear-eyed view of how to do this in the real world, this show is for you. I didn't grow up in supply chain. My career inside of Shell began in finance. I moved into sales, and from sales I went into strategy, and then ultimately got into supply chain. But coming into supply chain, I realized that this is a space that I really enjoyed because there's never a dull day in supply chain. There are always challenges. There are always opportunities to think about how and where you can make the business better. And very early on, I came to the conclusion that, if you gave me X dollars, I never knew how much those dollars were, but X dollars, that we could automate supply chain, that it's designed in a way that you can break down the processes and steps into discrete buckets that you could bring technology in and use that to really transform the way supply chain works. That dream never came to life because as you dive into it, you realize that is an extraordinarily complicated challenge to try to put to oneself. But I've been really excited over the past 2 or 3 years as AI has come to bear, and agentic AI in particular, to think about where and how we can revisit this opportunity again. And so that really for me is where and how this came together. Where and how can AI in its rise now become a transformative agent to really bring us closer to what that promised land of supply chain automation is? Supply chain is having its moment. COVID really was an eye-opener for a lot of organizations to come to recognize that supply chain is not just an execution engine, but really a strategic lever. And if you don't have your supply chain dialed in, where it's agile, resilient, capable, you really are going to struggle responding to events and shocks like COVID. Since then, we've had tariffs, we've had global conflicts, and these are all things that continue to elevate supply chain out of the just go get it done world and put it into the boardroom, where it moves from just a cost center to a strategic lever. And that's an important transformation that supply chain has been going through over the past decade. At the same time, AI has been ascendant. That has now become part of every conversation. You go onto LinkedIn and you scroll through it and absolutely everything is AI, AI, AI. The rise of supply chain and AI coming in, those two things have created a tremendous amount of excitement around the possibility of where AI can take supply chain. There's been a long-standing dream in the supply chain world of what we call the autonomous, cognitive, agile, resilient, sustainable supply chain. And there are a lot of other adjectives that you can throw at it. And now with the rise of AI, that dream is starting to feel real. Is the nirvana of that autonomous supply chain that can act on its own, that can think, that can respond without human intervention, is that dream now real? I believe that there is a clear case to be made for bringing AI into supply chains, leveraging that tool as a transformative opportunity for businesses. But the road to that promised land is going to be messy. It's going to be convoluted. It's going to be difficult. And there's no roadmap, despite the promises of vendors that say it's just an implementation away. The reality is that this is going to take a significant amount of strategic thinking, of process redesign, investment, culture building, governance, and a structural change in the way that supply chains operate in order to bring it to life. There's a lot of angst around AI in supply chain, and rightfully so. What does this mean for people? Am I going to have a job tomorrow? What does this mean for risk? Will we understand what our supply chains are doing? Or are things going to go off the rails in ways that we can't even predict and understand? And I think that's very valid. So where do we begin? I think it's important that we begin this conversation by stepping away from all the talk, by stepping back, and really let's start by just simply defining what does that future look like? What should that future look like? We don't have to get into a tremendous amount of detail in terms of what all this really means, but we need to start thinking about how we crystallize this going forward. So today, we're going to dive in. We're going to start thinking about what does that autonomous, cognitive, agentic supply chain look like? What do those words really mean? And we're going to start talking about what does that require. We're going to define it so we can start building it. But good news, this is not a technical show. We're not going to get into alphabet soup of AI terminology. We're not going to get into RAG and LLMs and NNs and MLOps. We're not going to do that. We're going to step back and think about what does this mean practically? How would you look at implementing this in your organization? So where do we begin? Let's begin by just simply defining supply chain. Supply chain means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. For the purposes of this conversation, I'm going to focus on what is a fairly common rubric that people use, which is plan, source, make, deliver. That's what a supply chain does. So planning is simply about figuring out what do people need, where, when, in what quantities, and then thinking about how do we coordinate giving that product to them. Sourcing is about getting the raw materials and the services that you need in order to make the things that your customers want to buy from you. Make is exactly that. That is producing the product. That is now taking those components, putting them together, packaging them, and making them ready for use by the customer. And deliver is logistics. It is about getting the materials in, so it's transportation, it's warehousing both inbound and outbound. So into your production facilities and warehouses and out to your customer. It also includes returns. So recognizing this, there is a tremendous breadth of activity that supply chain encompasses. And it's critical that we really understand and think about what is the scope of activity that we're looking at when we think about an autonomous cognitive supply chain. And really having a firm view on what that vision is, on what that scope that we're talking about is really critical for us then to be able to start the process of breaking this down into what are those discrete steps we need to take in order to achieve the vision that we're pursuing. A lot of what you'll hear in conversations, going to workshops, going to conferences is narrowly focused on individual elements. But getting to the promised land of a truly autonomous cognitive agentic supply chain requires us to think bigger, to think across domains, not just planning, not just sourcing, not just manufacturing, not just logistics, but all of those working together, working with other parts of the enterprise, working with our suppliers, working with our customers, working with our regulators. Because it's that interconnected web of activity that all needs to come together in order to really have an autonomous, cognitive, agentic supply chain. Not an autonomous demand planning process, not an autonomous vehicle scheduling process, not an autonomous vehicle tendering process. It has to be an and, not an or activity. When I talk to executives, what I recognize is that one of the fastest ways for us to lose money in the AI race is to chase objectives that we have not yet defined. And that's why it's important that we spend some time today defining what those objectives are. Now that we've defined supply chain, let's look at some base principles that we have to think about as we talk about that journey to autonomous. I want you to have the mental image of a pyramid, right? Where you start at the base and you progressively move up to the top. At the bottom, when we're talking about an autonomous supply chain, is the concept of automation. And automation is about where you have rules-based execution, right? You have systems that can perform a series of digital tasks. You can capture data. Examples of this would include reorder point triggers for your material. So you hit a certain inventory level, you place an order to your supplier. It could include predictive algorithms for maintenance. It's now time to look at pump 2. That's automation. Then the next level up from that would be around analytics. It's not about capturing data and being able to then report it, to visualize it, translate that into KPIs. It's about being able to trigger alerts that come from activities that are occurring inside your supply chain. So your buyer might be alerted to, okay, it's now time to place an order for a material. Visibility improves, so you now see more, you understand more about what's going on, but decisions are still human. This is still about human in the loop taking action when those alerts or when that information comes through. The next level up from that is now we're getting into cognition, into the cognitive elements. This is now where your systems understand context. They understand what are the constraints that you're operating under? What are those trade-offs you have to make? What are the relationships that are involved? This is now where you're moving from understanding what just happened to why it matters. This is the first level at which your systems are now augmenting your people. They're helping you make better decisions because they're prioritizing what those decisions you need to make are. This is where you start shifting away from just efficiency. Automation and analytics are about doing things faster. Now, when you get into the cognitive space, it's about doing things smarter. It's about accelerating the decision-making process that your organization has to go through. The next level up from cognition now is agentic. So now your systems understand what needs to happen. They can accelerate the decision-making process, and now they can take action. So this is where you now have goal-directed behavior. You can set those automated rules that you have. Your tools can now take the information coming in. You've set the sandbox. Now they can take decisions based on those rules that have been established. They can initiate their own action without waiting for a human to come back and tell them, go do this. It now allows coordination across domains. Your demand forecasting agent can now talk to your production scheduling agent, can now talk to your vehicle tendering agent. And now you can get an order, process it, and execute it. That is what Agentic now enables you to do. Last, then, the nirvana that we're talking about is autonomous. And autonomous is where all these activities happen without human intervention. Humans are no longer needed to stitch together the decisions that need to be made. We are out of the loop. This doesn't mean that humans are completely out of the game, because that activity still needs to be bounded by governance, by risk thresholds, by exception logics. There are parameters that need to be set that enable the agents and the system to be able to work effectively. We've talked about this as a pyramid, and moving up this pyramid, it's not necessarily a linear progression. Going from automation to analytics is a much smaller leap than going from agentic to autonomous will be. The danger here is that as we're starting to see agentic tools embedded into some of our processes, we think that moving to autonomous will be easy. There is a huge gulf between agentic, even if that is across multiple domains, and autonomous. Many organizations underestimate those leaps as you go from one level of the pyramid to another. Never mind that most organizations, frankly, are still close to the bottom of that pyramid, even if they've started embedding some agentic tools into their processes and workflows. Now let's focus on the top three levels of that pyramid: cognitive, agentic, autonomous. Cognition, being cognitive, is not just simply pattern recognition. It's not just about predicting, it's about understanding. Cognitive systems can interpret, they recognize constraints, they recognize relationships. They surface relevant options, not just signals. Let's think about something that we're facing today: tariffs. An automated system can flag tariff exposure. So I know I have products that are made of steel or aluminum. So I have products that are affected. An automated system can flag that. A cognitive system takes that and tells me, so what? What orders do I have that are exposed? What customers are impacted? Which ones are the most important customers for me to think about and respond to? What's the margin impact of these tariffs? So where do I need to focus my effort in thinking about this? What mitigation paths exist? So if I am facing tariffs on steel coming from country A, maybe I bring it from country B. Or can I source it from a supplier here inside of the United States? So what you see a cognitive system allows you to do is move away from just being presented with problems or information. And now you're moving into a space where cognitive systems allow you to accelerate the decision-making that your organization needs to take. A cognitive system accelerates the quality and speed of decision-making within your supply chain and across your enterprise. The conversations are accelerated with your suppliers. Which steel manufacturers are impacted? It accelerates the conversations with your customers. How do I respond to the orders that you have much faster than you could have before? One of the lessons that I learned very early on in my career in supply chain is that Murphy, from Murphy's Law, lives in supply chain. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong every day. A cognitive system allows us to respond to those disruptions, to those incidents, to those issues much faster. The kicker is that you don't need an AI that predicts or just surfaces all the things that are happening. You need AI that allows you to narrow the decision space and allow you to focus on just the important things. What are those priority items that we do need to make decisions around? That is where cognitive moves you up that curve. It reduces the surface space of decisions that your organization has to take. Frees up your people to focus on those higher value items that require their direct intervention. So now what do we mean by agentic? Let's step beyond the hype that you hear about agents. At their core, agents initiate action without waiting. They do not need a human being to prompt them to take action. They coordinate with other agents. They simulate trade-offs around decisions. They escalate, they recommend, and yes, they do act within guardrails. So agents aren't necessarily these rogue applications that go off and do whatever they want. But there are constraints and controls within which they have to operate. I think of agents as less like tools and really more sort of narrowly defined employees, which is why you start hearing people talk about managing agents going forward, because they can in fact take on roles and activities that some people, or certainly parts of some people's jobs are. They're fast, they're capable, but they can be very dangerous without boundaries. So stepping back, thinking about a cross-plan, source, make, deliver, your processes and roles in your supply chains can be broken down into subcomponents, discrete steps and activities that can be transitioned into agent activities. The rules, the sandboxes, the parameters, the decision criteria that these agents need to operate within do need to be defined. And we do need to have course correction as needed if they go off track. This raises an important reflection that hopefully has been coming through as we've been talking about this. You don't fix process discipline with AI. A lot of what I'm talking about are criteria and process definitions, standard operating procedures that in fact need to be in place in order for you to be able to think about translating them into what an agent can, and even more importantly, should do. If you don't have that today, you need to get it, because that's going to be an existential differentiator between those that can rapidly deploy AI in their operations versus those that cannot. And now we come to autonomous. Cognitive and agentic are in many ways the easier part of the top of that pyramid. The leap to autonomous is huge. It's huge because it requires everything beneath it to come together effectively and meaningfully in order for us to be able to step out of the loop. Autonomous means that you have interoperable and trusted data. It means that you have governance and accountability systems with explicit decision criteria that govern both the machine and the humans involved in those processes. It means that you've thought through and have defined exception handling upfront. So what happens when the edge case, the Murphy, rears his head? It means you've thought of risk thresholds, stop conditions. You've thought about failure modes. When and how will things go wrong? Because guess what? Things will go wrong. It means that your organization is culturally ready. It means you've reoriented your organization and people have bought into the journey from the top to the very bottom of the organization. I don't believe autonomy means hands off. I believe autonomy means hands applied differently. What I mean by that is there is that nirvana of complete autonomy. Today, we're seeing the development of what they call dark warehouses. Right? So these are warehouses where they're dark because there are no lights on. Robots put product away onto shelves, take things off of shelves, package them, load them onto trucks, with no humans inside the room to oversee them. So the lights are off. They're dark. That's an autonomous warehouse. Imagine if that's applied entirely to your supply chain, where humans are out of the loop and perhaps only brought in under very specific or very edge cases. I think that is a dream that's very far away. And in many ways, perhaps not necessarily one for us really to focus on today. Where I think a much richer conversation can be had is around what I think of as bounded autonomy. And bounded autonomy is autonomy within discrete processes and domains that could run across plan, source, make, deliver, and can encompass significant portions of your supply chain activities. But I still see a very clear role for humans to not only be on the loop, but very actively involved in shaping the activities of those agents, of that autonomous activity that you have within your supply chain. I think of this as an ever-expanding bubble of activity. Inside the bubble, more and more of that can be taken up by AI. But on the frontier, on the boundaries of that bubble, even as their activity space is expanding, humans are going to be critical as decision makers, as creative thinkers, as coaches and trainers for the AI as it absorbs more and more activity. That's what I mean by bounded autonomy. Remember the three-legged organizational stool of processes, systems, and people. You don't get autonomous by pushing more technology into broken processes. You don't get more autonomous without your people. I've given you a lot to think about. As I said at the beginning, pursuing an autonomous supply chain, even if it's just a bounded autonomous supply chain, is going to be messy. It's going to be difficult. There will be a lot of false starts. This conversation is not intended to deter you from pursuing that. Because as I said, I truly believe that bringing AI in, particularly agentic AI, into the supply chain conversation is a game changer. But I do not want this to be a journey you pursue with rose-colored glasses. This is one that requires us to recognize the challenge and the opportunity that we have in front of us and to pursue it accordingly. This is meant to ground you in the reality of what that journey will entail, because that clarity enables practical and credible strategic decisions. The good news is we're seeing more and more organizations deploying technology to move up that pyramid. So we're seeing reasons to believe that this journey is possible. We're seeing predictive maintenance being integrated into production scheduling. We're seeing freight procurement agents being integrated into transportation management systems to enable carrier tendering that's benchmarked against rates to improve the efficiency of logistics activities and reduce their cost. We're seeing organizations patenting systems that match demand forecasting with pricing to be able to set and determine how they move stock through their stores. So no, end-to-end autonomous supply chains do not exist in the wild today, but we're much farther along than many people realize. And if you're not taking steps to get on that journey, you'll quickly find yourself left well behind. Now that we've defined the conversation we're going to be having, over this season, we'll look at what that orchestration looks like across plan, source, make, deliver, within the enterprise and with our external partners, suppliers, customers, regulators. We'll look at this not as isolated systems, not as isolated activities, but as an integrated cognitive autonomous system. Importantly, we'll explore how leaders should think, not so much what they should do, because I don't know your business, and don't trust anybody that tells you they do. You know your business. This is about helping to shape a framework that can be used to develop that roadmap on your journey to autonomous that works for you. We'll start by looking at the foundations of leadership, culture, data, governance. How do we think about valuing whether autonomous is worth pursuing? And then we'll engage operators. We'll look at where and how are we seeing these technologies deployed in the wild, in planning organizations, sourcing and procurement organizations, manufacturing, logistics. And we'll come back and have a rich conversation around, what does this mean? Is this worth pursuing? What should we pursue? I'm here to pressure test the autonomous future and explore how it comes to life. If you've been in the trenches of AI, deployed it, seen how it succeeds and how it fails, I'd love to have you on this show. I'd love to have the conversation about how these models have operated in production, the design choices and outcomes that you have seen. In our next episode, we will explore leadership. Defining what autonomy is just the beginning. Leadership will determine whether autonomy succeeds or fails. The decision rights, the incentives, the governance structures that are required. The next episode, we'll talk about what that leadership required to bring the autonomous, agentic, cognitive supply chain to life is. Welcome to Season 1 of Supply ChAInge. Thanks for listening to Supply ChAInge. If today's conversation sparked questions, and it should, that's the point. Supply chain is complex, and these questions don't resolve in a single conversation. Share this podcast with someone who's navigating these decisions, and join us for the next episode as we continue exploring what it really takes to make AI work.